The Breathe Network connects survivors of sexual trauma with sliding scale, trauma-informed, and holistic healing practitioners across the United States and Canada. Additionally, they train healing, health, and wellness professionals on the nuanced mind, body, and soul impacts of sexual violence and how to cultivate best practices in trauma-informed care. And I'm really just excited to now hand over to Molly and Myra to introduce themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that beautiful and thoughtful introduction. And I so appreciate the way that the Healing Justice team holds this space for all of us. It's personally and professionally significant for the Breathe Network to partner with Healing Justice London, because we really respect and admire and are learning so much from the ways in which your organization is holding individual trauma alongside collective and generational and historical experiences of trauma. And that's a place where we're growing and evolving. So this partnership is really important to us. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. Some of you may have been here last week. Some of you may be new to me and new to my co-presenter, Myra. I thought I would just start by maybe we'd introduce ourselves, and then I can share a little bit about the structure of our time. And we'll take a little bit more time to do some orientation and some kind of intentional arriving in this space together after that. You know, my bio is my bio, but what I share when I'm asked to self-introduce always changes, depending on the season of my life. And I think it's so important just to acknowledge that I come to this work as a survivor. However, it is not trauma that has brought me into this space. It is my healing and it's my resilience. And that for me is always at the heart of the way I hold my work and I hold the work with other survivors, is this recognition that the resilience is really at the center. That's the foundation. The trauma comes into people's lives, or it's part of their ancestral history. But even beneath that, there's something deeper. And that's what we're aiming to kind of nourish and hold and expand. So I came to the movement to end sexual violence initially as a medical and legal advocate at rape crisis centers, a number of them actually in the Chicago area in the United States. And what I found was that the work was really exacerbating my own trauma history and my symptoms. And that's not surprising. That's to be expected given the nature of how I was coming into contact with survivors really in the acute crisis stage of their recovery. And that exacerbation of symptoms and then the sensitivities that I was kind of bringing forward within my professional spaces were not welcome. And I think we experience that as survivors in our families or our communities or larger spaces, that our tremendous sensitivity is not always welcome. And so I did what I could for the time that I could to kind of compartmentalize or override or separate those parts of myself that were feeling some of the, vicarious wounding of doing the work. And then I reached that place where it was too much. And so I had this idea that there must be a place where my sensitivity and survivor sensitivity would be recognized as a gift and a resource and almost like a map for how we could re-envision the work. And that place was the Breathe Network. So I made a pivot, and that's what I've been really attending to for the last 9 years, is really cultivating a wide community really of survivors and healers and supporters and organizations and humans who are recognizing that it's not actually even just trauma survivors that experience how our bodies communicate. We all have nervous systems, we all have bodies. And so part of what's been so important to me in this work and what I hold in all the areas of my life is that, like, our bodies are such an incredible compass. They have so many messages, and the work that we get to do is to find ways to start translating the language of our body, not just in our recovery, but also for the many other areas of our life that we inhabit. And so yes, it's just an honor to be here. And I want to acknowledge one more piece that's important with my practice as a somatic experiencing practitioner. I was drawn to it for the trauma healing element of it, and yet what I've found that it's really become a way of navigating just life that's been really resourceful, particularly as a new mother, particularly as a human inhabiting this particular moment in time, really starting to listen and refuse to override the ways that my body is communicating with me has been helpful. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague and actually one of my great teachers, Myra Holtzman, who has been a unintentional, probably, but still a mentor of mine from afar for many, many years. And I'm just so deeply honored to be in this space with her and her tremendous expertise. So
Thanks, Molly. Hi, everyone. My name is Myra Holtzman. I am excited, a little nervous, and super honored to be here. What a beautiful introduction by both Molly and Farzana. So I'm a trained somatic therapist, and I have a group psychotherapy practice that focuses on bringing therapeutic touch modalities coupled with somatic approaches to help heal all kinds of trauma. But in particular, my practice focuses on early trauma and healing of healing developmental trauma. And I've been studying somatics since 2007. And part of the path to me getting to this point today is learning about co-regulating touch, which we're going to talk about in this session, and how important healthy, safe enough touch is in the healing process, because it's not something that is widely used amongst therapists. And that really stems from realizing, interestingly, through the trainings, that I had a fair amount of early trauma that had gone unattended. And when I started learning about co-regulating touch, it was like I just landed in my purpose on the planet. And one of my big missions on the planet is to introduce and promote the idea of healthy, safe touch, and how we do that both with self as well as with other people and in our relationships. So I'm really looking forward to this next 90 minutes or so that we have together. And I think I'll just leave it at that. And I'll hand it back over to Molly. I'll follow your lead.
thank you, Myra.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just give you a small kind of framework of our time together. We're going to continue to revisit this idea of what the body remembers. And I think Myra and I both hold what the body remembers as in a very broad way, where we're recognizing, yes, it remembers, the pain that it has endured, but it also remembers joy and ease and comfort and goodness and safety. And so the work that we are doing, particularly through the lens of somatic experiencing, is really helping us uncover, what does our body not only know about trauma, but what does our body know about healing? And so that'll be kind of infused throughout the time. We'll spend a little bit more time talking about some of the primary principles of somatic experiencing theory that sort of guide us in the work. One of my teachers said that much of this work is really about helping folks come into their own symmetry. And I think that's almost just a way of thinking about healing, is that we're just kind of returning to or coming into or growing towards our own sense of symmetry, however we understand that word, whether it's something that's very tangible and structural, or it's broader and it's emotional or energetic, but we're finding what for us feels like a place of symmetry or alignment. We're going to talk about these elements of human experience that kind of constitute what we're paying attention to when we're doing SC. And they're called SciBAM. It has to do with sensation, imagery, behavior, affect, and meaning making. And we'll break that down. And the reason I want to share that is I really want us to, in the conversations around somatics, I want us to really be intentional that sensation is just one channel of how we can relate to ourselves in a somatic way. And so we'll talk about how we're tracking that in SE, but we'll talk about it with a sort of with the attention on how can we track that in ourselves, just individually in our lives. What can we pay attention to as a clue and as a resource? And then, I want us to focus much on Myra's work around co-regulatory touch and really clarifying, what does that mean? What does it look like? Why is it uniquely important and transformative for those of us whose trauma happened at the hands of another human? And so Myra will kind of take us through that. And then we'll spend some time kind of closing. We'll weave questions and breaks within our time together. And Farzana and Sarah will be kind of attending to your questions. And then before we do this kind of landing, I think that we cannot sort of overemphasize the importance of valuing our own experience in real time in this space together. So that's something that Myra and I are both paying attention to. That's what we've been, really supported in through our training, is that we're not actually just tracking the person sitting across from us or on the other side of the screen. We're attending to our own experience of being in a body and having a nervous system, and how that might be interfacing or interacting with the people that we're with. So we'll be paying attention to ourselves to the degree that that feels right. And that's the invitation for you as well. I think it's always important when we're thinking about mindfulness and listening to the body, to also normalize that sometimes getting distance from our bodies or our real-time experience can be an important way of coping, and it can also be a bridge to our healing. So while reclamation of safe embodiment is so much a part of this work, it is never done in a way that creates a hierarchy where embodiment is somehow better than places of dissociation or going away. We're recognizing that it's all part of what it is to be a human who's healing and living on earth. So my teacher, who I often am referencing, Joshua Silve, had said, sometimes not being fully here helps to be able to deal with being here. So if you find yourself going away, whether that's kind of spontaneously happening, you're sort of notice like, oh, where did I go? Or where am I right now? Or you just feel like you want to pull your attention back. And that might be coloring or swaying your body or doing some other kind of movement. Maybe it's just laying down or exiting the space, whatever for you kind of constitutes pulling attention back. We invite you to follow that. We want to give our bodies, to the degree that we can, a message that we're in a safe enough environment to be here. And sometimes that sense of a safe environment happens when we move back from the screen. I'm close to the screen. Maybe at some point I need to go back to the wall. Maybe that safe environment comes from turning the screen off. Maybe it's applying some lotion or oil, whatever it is that is uniquely meaningful to you. Safe enough is a spectrum. Safer is part of a spectrum. So if you do nothing else during this time, other than occasionally check in with yourself and your experience, you're doing the work that we're here to kind of offer and share today, which is really just noticing that our body has some information and it's interesting and being curious, and then making some choices around that. The other thing that I wanted to mention, because it may come up today, is that I think it's important as we're engaging with this material, coming to it with our own experiences of surviving not only sexual trauma, but other forms of trauma, whether individual or collective and systemic, is that there are going to be times that we have an experience in our body. We feel a sensation, a fluttering in our stomach. We feel an ache somewhere in our body. We feel tingling in our throat. Last week, I felt kind of tears just like behind my eyes. And when that comes up, for me, it can be really interesting to distinguish what is my body having an experience versus what is overwhelm. And I just want to offer, and I want to be clear that for me, what has been the greatest gift of my studies and really being a client of somatic experiencing has been realizing that I can trust my body and I can trust my nervous system's capacity for self-regulation, so that as something arises, I see it happening or I feel it happening, and I know that I can pause and I can attend to it briefly, and that I can make a transition back to whatever I was doing, whether I'm teaching or I'm parenting or I'm doing something else. And for me, that's actually my resilience. Overwhelm is when I feel that I don't really know what to do. For me, that's my experience. It's like I'm not really sure what's happening. I've lost that sense of observer. I've lost my sort of like roots in the here and now. So that's kind of what that's what I'm always working towards. It's not like one or the other. It's a curiosity. It's a practice. But I want to offer that to you. Like if that comes up for you, or if that comes up for anyone who's speaking or teaching, part of this practice is I've learned to really trust, and I've learned to really cultivate my nervous system's capacity to move towards sympathetic activation and kind of hit a cusp and down regulate. And so I'm choosing, when I'm with you today, to not override. If something too big comes my way, I know how to put the brakes on and I'll do it. But I also really know like when I can let something move forward. So I want you to, I just want you to know that, because I think it's important. Like if you're teacher, if you're seeing someone who's like teaching or presenting, having an experience, it's like, hey, wait, am I safe here? Because are they okay? You know, we want to like take care of them. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to stay with what I'm embodying every day in my life is, oh, here comes something. I can let it come through, because I really have a deep trust that when it comes through, then I get to come right back into the room and to be really most present with you. So I want to offer that. And I'd love to see, Myra, if there's like another way you might want, if you want to add to that, or if you relate to that in a different way, or if you have like a resource for how you might work with like something arising in that way and how we attend to it.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to everything that you were saying, and it was all resonant. I mean, it's all parallel in terms of part of what you're talking about is capacity, right? So you and I have spent a lot of time in training working on building capacity in our nervous system to be what we call in our window of tolerance, and also how to get back there, because we know what that feels like. And so I think that the invitation is great, because part of what I'm hearing you offer is, if you need to take a break, if you need to do something to support you being more grounded or more present, then absolutely do that during our time together.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
adding that. Yeah. So we will take a little pause in a bit, but I wonder if we've been on the call for some time, if now might be a chance for us just to land in our spaces individually and as a group who's participating in this call across time zones and oceans and mountains and rivers, very, very wide around the world. So I'll invite you to take a moment now to just begin to let your senses move out into the space around you. Within somatic experiencing, often there's attention to letting the eyes wander around your space and seeing where they're drawn. But I've often found that sometimes accessibility to orientation is increased when we also welcome other sort of sense pathways to be part of that experience. So feel free to just take a moment and let any of your sense organs move around your space, just beginning to notice what you notice and really taking the time you need. As you're taking in your space, you might notice that your breath starts to shift. You might start to notice some kind of movement that wants to happen. Seeing to what degree you might follow some of your body's impulses here. It might be helpful to maintain your attention outward within your environment, or you might start to feel your attention naturally starting to move a little bit closer towards your own shape. You might be just aware of your body breathing. You might take a moment just to invite your seen and maybe even your unseen supports to meet you in this space, whether those are objects or elements, humans, animals. It might be helpful just to check in with whatever it may be that is supporting you, either beneath you or behind you, getting a sense of the ground that is holding you up. If it's useful, you might even invite gravity here as a resource to anchor you just a little bit more into your space. And over the next minute, perhaps beginning to invite your attention to move a little bit more outward. It might be helpful to move in some way, to take a breath, an intentional breath here, to let your senses shift around your space again and just notice how things look or how they sound or how they feel right now at the end of this brief check-in with your own experience. It might be helpful at this point to open it up to see if any questions have come in. If there's anything that people want to bring forward, it may be a question or it might be a comment, and I'll offer it up to you, Farzana, if there's anything you want to share.
Thank you. And thank you so much for guiding us through that really grounding process. We have a few questions that people have sent in, and please do keep sending them in. I think the first one first two that we could maybe sit with is, how do we know which modalities will suit us on a bodywork or somatic journey if even taking the first step feels overwhelming? And maybe akin to that is, what happens if we can't find a way to feel safe in our bodies? So just sitting with those two for now.
Myra, do you want to take that or do you want me to start?
Sure, I can start and then, of course, chime in. So if I heard it correctly, the question is, how do we know which modality is going to suit us when it might be difficult to start? And I think that that's what the question was. And where I went with that immediately is, and of course I have a bias towards somatic therapists, but really what I tell folks who are looking for therapists that call, or looking for a therapist and calling my practice, is, how does the connection feel? How is it to be in conversation with this person that you're interviewing? And I really encourage the people that call our practice, like, you're here to interview us to make sure that we're a good fit for you. Because if things go wrong in the beginning of that consult and you maybe feel talked over or diminished or really not heard, that's not, that doesn't bode well for getting work done, because part of trust, part of what happens in trusting someone is that you start to engender and embody safety. So in my practice, I really focus on training my people that when they're doing a consultation, of course, we're trauma informed. And so that means a whole bunch of different things, and that we're really there to attend to what's happening in the moment versus getting through our checklist of questions to make sure that they're a good fit, if that makes sense. So one of the things that I have trained my intake coordinator to do, for example, is to listen for dysregulation. And if she's hearing it during that initial consultation, she knows how to help slow down the process and guide that client through a grounding activity so that they can be more present to see if we are a good fit for them. And those to me are signs and signals of people that you might want to work with if they know how to attune to you in the moment, again, versus sticking to some agenda that we have. And that unfortunately happens a lot in therapy, you know? So that's where I would start, is, how does it feel for you? Did your shoulders sag a little bit? Could you exhale as you were talking to that therapist? You know, were you able to say, I need to take a break, this has already been a lot? And were they willing to reschedule the last 15 minutes of that consultation? Because that's how you really meet people in safety, and safety happens in the present moment. So trusting the relationship, and also just trusting what's happening in your body as you're connecting with that practitioner. Molly, what do you think?
I think that was perfect, and there's nothing I want to add to it, because you know what, Myra is she's already like leading us towards where we're going later, which is this idea of the initial conditions that sometimes we talk about in somatic experiencing, which is this idea of how something starts will influence how it goes. And so what is so powerful, and I'm not surprised that that's how, Myra, your practice is holding people, is that from that initial point of contact, there is attention towards agency, um, embodiment, co-regulation, um, and an understanding that we can go as slow as we need to go with this, and that that is fundamental to counterbalancing the too much, too fast, too soon nature of trauma. So that was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Farzana, there was a second part of the question, and I wonder if you could repeat that.
Absolutely. The second part of the question was actually another question is, what if we cannot find a way to feel safe in our bodies?
Do you want to attend to that, Molly, or do you want me to?
You know, are you okay with starting? Because I've been talking a lot and I'd love to hear your voice on this, because safety in the body is your thing.
It is. It's my jam.
It's your jam. Okay.
So part of what I heard in that question is that it's whoever the person was asking, that it's my job to figure out how to feel safe in the body. And what I really want you to hear, and Farzana spoke to it right at the beginning, is that when you're working with me or people that are trained the way that I am, we're in that space together. So it's not you having to figure out how to regulate your system and feel safe and feel grounded. There's a back and forth, which is really what co-regulation means, which is like, okay, you're not, that might not be available for you. And so why don't we together try out some things? So when I'm working with clients, I use a lot of language like we, and we're in this together. I'm right here with you. And I'm also helping them to learn how to find safety in the body through play and experimentation, right? I'm not saying this is the thing you need to do to find it. I'll say things like, what are you willing to try something? And let's just see how that might land for you, how that might shift the state of being that you're in to something that feels a little bit less agitated or a little bit less worried. And I'm forgetting the question now, but I guess I'm remembering it now. The main point of it is that that's not a job for you to do by yourself, right? That's why we're in it together. We're in this therapeutic relationship and context where our nervous systems and our ways of being are constantly doing this, right? This really nice sort of easy back and forth. And my job as the clinician is to support you in finding your way to come into your body, and not by yourself, right? And not with me telling you what to do. It's more like, I don't know, let's experiment and see. How did that go? Well, yeah, I could tell you didn't really like that. You kind of braced a little bit. Or like, I don't know, let's try this other thing because it worked last time, right? So it's not on the person caught like needing support, wanting to come into therapy to figure all of that out. It is the we space and the clinician that ushers that, supports that client in learning how to be more connected to those physiological states or sensations that might otherwise be scary and be called unsafe. So it's a we thing. It's never just you have to figure this out, because that just isn't gonna fly very well.
You know, when I hear you talking, I think about this idea, the idea of co-regulation, and I think about a parent soothing an infant, right? And that, you know, an infant who doesn't yet have access to their own capacity for self-regulation is really relying on that competent caregiver who is in a place of greater regulation to kind of lend or share or offer their own regulated or grounded nervous system to that infant who's who's learning that. And as I say that, I want to hold with a lot of tenderness and care that there are probably many of us in this space who didn't get that as infants. So I really want to acknowledge that, or as children, that competent care provider wasn't there meeting and attenuating our nervous system in the way that we needed. I think it's really important, you know, right now, you know, we're talking a lot about some of the sort of like building blocks of the brain and the nervous system. And And it's so powerful to see how sort of the physiology of the body and co-regulation is making its way into so many spaces. And, my heart goes out to those of us who might see the importance of that sort of wiring getting laid down really early as sort of fundamental to our development, and feeling a kind of brokenness if we didn't have that as little ones. And I just want to say, like, really clearly that part of our healing and part of our body and brain's amazing capacities, we have the capacity to recover those pathways, to repair the places within us where those connections or attachments weren't made. And so it's important for me to name that, because I think we can start to, even the language and the conversations within sort of the traumatology field can start to other those of us who didn't necessarily have those sort of ideal experiences. So anyway, that takes me back to this idea that, we evolutionarily, we were designed to co-regulate with other people. We were designed to find safety in the presence of other humans. And this provides a unique complexity for those of us who are survivors of sexual trauma or other forms of physical abuse, because we're sort of in this place where there is a part of us that is biologically wired towards others, but then there's this deep and wise aversion, because humans have been both the source of our suffering, while also they can be the source of safety and healing. So finding someone like Myra or another practitioner who can really hold that space offers this profound possibility of repairing this innate and sort of evolutionarily designed resource within us, that other humans can co-regulate us, that we can lean on another person, and that can grow us and bolster us and help us tap into safety and embodiment and agency and strength. And then we might at some point be lending our own regulation to another person who's navigating through something. So I think that's what makes somatic experiencing different from some other forms of therapy and body work, that we see that it's reciprocal, that we're working, it's a relationship. And then I also just want to highlight that this is sort of in some ways emergent within sort of Western approaches to trauma healing, but it's hearkening back to what indigenous cultures have known, that we heal together, that healing is collective, that healing is in relationship, that there's wisdom in the body around how it's holding trauma and how it's also the resource for healing. So yeah, I'll pause there and see if there's maybe other questions before we take that break.
Thank you so much for those really robust responses. Maybe a question that we could take that leads us into the break, and it's probably for folks who maybe didn't get to join us last week, if you could just expand on what somatic experiencing is, and then how it could be used in regulating. Maybe the second part we can pick up after break, but just a kind of explanation around somatic experiencing as a refresher.
So yeah, we started to sort of wade into what is the sort of underpinnings of somatic experiencing last week, and we'll flesh it out a little bit more in the second half of our conversation. I think of somatic experiencing as a way of recognizing that our body is a primary resource for our healing. So part of what we're doing is we're acknowledging that trauma lives in the nervous system, and we are creating the conditions in the work that we do where people who have been through any kind of trauma can begin to disinhibit the parts of themselves that they've had to really hold up or grow or sharpen as a way to sort of cope with the aftermath or the aftershocks of trauma, so that they can start to disinhibit those parts of themselves and begin to access elements of their physiological process that were thwarted during the traumatic event, the parts of their process that did not get to complete. So we think of these cycles of activation and deactivation or settling as just a natural inherent part of how the human body works. And our nervous system is oscillating at all times throughout the day, and we're getting some sympathetic charge, and it could be because of something really joyful or something a little bit anxiety provoking, and then we're naturally coming down from that, and we're settling and feeling more grounded and more connected. Of course, trauma is a much more acute experience of activation. However, still, our bodies are designed for that. They are designed to know what to do when they are in the face of overwhelming or life-threatening terror or threat. And so they are ready to respond. They are ready to fight or to flee or to freeze if fight and flight are not available. And they are ready when they've moved through those states and that they've gotten to a place of safety or safe enough, they're ready to come down from those experiences. And that's a physiological process. That process of coming out of freeze is tremendous. That process of coming from fight and flight down into a place of ease and connection and safety is a really big deal. And largely, our culture has conditioned us away from being able to see those processes through completely. Our giant neocortex and all of the cultural conditioning that we've taken in wants to dampen down those innate responses, which may be vocalizing in a way that feels very animalistic. It may be that our body is shaking and trembling. We often haven't met those parts of our biology until we are in a place of having been deeply traumatized. And that in and of itself, sometimes I think is terrifying. If you've never experienced freeze until trauma and you've never heard of it, it's terrifying. So there's culture, and then there's that individual experience of what is happening that we have found wise ways to quell and to sequester. And this is where I think of, particularly freeze as this beautiful state of energy conservation, that our body has found a way to sequester something that is so overwhelming that it will hold it until the conditions are safe enough for it to start to come out very, very slowly. And so SE holds all of this human experience, not only as normal and that it makes sense, but we really valorize the body's capacity. And we are going to give a person a container to start to feel some of those states through in a way that doesn't re-overwhelm them. And that's part of what I think also makes SE different from other modalities. We are going so slow. We are taking it like an accordion, and we are stretching out time so that there is enough spaciousness for us to feel even that first moment of something's not right. Like for me, even when I say that, I got a chill, in my body. A lot of us know that experience of something's not right. And so even right now, as I say that, and whatever that might have even evoked, I just want to name that can be where we spend our time in a session. And we might come back to what's right about right now. And how do you know right now is okay? How do you know in your body or in this room or through the contact and the expression on my face that right now something is okay? And that we are safe in this moment together, or safer, or safe enough. And we know that experience may have created some activation, and we're not pushing it away. We're just setting it over here. And a person may say, I need it much farther. And we might say, we are going to send it across the ocean. And we're going to come back to what is right about right here and now. And we'll orient and we'll take our time and we'll spend some time in a place of greater regulation, a greater sense of ease, a greater sense of we're in our bodies together, we're in a relationship together before we even begin to go back to whatever that material may have started to open up. So we are doing the opposite of too much, too fast, too soon. We're saying you have all the space you need, you have the time you need. There is no agenda. There is what is right here. And that you're in charge, like you have the remote. You get to pause, we can rewind, we can send energy and sensation across the ocean. And it could take us years. It could take us years to get to the thing we might want to get to. And that is your unique and just right process for you. So we are, as my teacher Joshua says, we are the guardians at the gates of overwhelm when we are in our role as a somatic experiencing practitioner. Overwhelm can happen. We're not afraid of it. We know how to work with it. We know how to hold it. But we are really committed to the extent that we can to seeing it coming and just taking a step back or moving back or slowing things down.
We're going to pick up from where Molly had kind of opened up and from the question that was posed around what is somatic experiencing, and hand that over to Myra to also unpack, ways it can be used for regulation. And just before the break, we also got a question alongside that, which is, if you can't afford or you don't have the resources to access a co-regulating space, how might that be available to you? So if you can't afford it, is there self-regulation that you could start with? And yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Myra.
So part of what I heard in the question from Farzana is how to do something like co-regulating touch if you don't have access to it because of finances or you can't find a practitioner. So a couple things that I do. So there's always the concept of self-holding, and self-holding is when you're applying the just right touch to your own system. And I think I'll just go through this now, and then we'll sort of go from there. But self-holding at its most basic idea is the idea of applying touch to yourself in a way that feels good. So I'll give you an example. Clients often, when they're stressed, will be in my office and they'll be doing things like holding their head really hard, or they're just like, they're touching themselves, but there isn't intention or awareness about actually how soothing that might be. So self-holding is any way that you might hold your own body with intention and with care for the experience that you happen to be in. A lot of us do it unconsciously. And again, I see people doing this a lot. And I'll ask them, say, does this, when I notice that you're doing this, does this feel good? And they'll sort of pause because they won't really know what I'm talking about. And I'm saying, well, there's a resource here. Your body's automatically going to support your head. And so when you're doing self-holding, the whole idea is that I talk about my hands because I do all touch work in my practice. I talk about my hands as conduits of compassion. So when I'm holding myself, my hands become these conduits of compassion that I'm sending into my own system, right? So a very typical self-holding exercise that I will guide clients through, and I'm beginning it already, is, especially when they're really dysregulated or feeling really overwhelmed, is to have them do any kind of self-holding. But the 5-part that I do, and I'll do it briefly so that you can see. So I have one hand behind my back. There's a little bony part called the occipital ridge right behind your head. And then I'll have a hand on my forehead. And the contact that you're applying is meant to feel pleasant enough or solid, right? It's not meant to be painful, because sometimes we can do that. We can hurt ourselves because we're just trying to brace against whatever the experience is that we're having. So this is often the first holding, and I'll do this with clients, and we'll hold it for as long as they want to. And then we're breathing. And then I'll also switch to either holding the sides of the head, but I particularly like holding my face. There's something about, there's a lot of nerves in your face are connected to your heart, and the nerves in your face, like there's a trigeminal nerve, I can't remember where it is, but there's a bunch of nerves. And so if you're just holding your face gently, it's a way of also helping the system relax and down regulate, right? So it goes from, this would be sort of position 1, right? And you can use one, you can do it any way that you want. I'm showing you the way that I teach clients. So position 1 is like this. Position 2 might be somewhere on the sides of your head or on your face. That's my particular favorite, because then my arms also get to rest, right? So this would be another one. The third one would be going back to your forehead and then holding onto your heart space. And I'm doing this quickly, but really what you're doing is, as the person who is doing this, is you're noticing the impact of what happens. So you're tracking awareness, and you're looking for states where you're starting to relax more, right? Did your shoulders drop a little? Did the tension in your jaw start to release and your tongue drop into the bottom of your mouth? Is your breath suddenly a little fuller or easier, right? So this would be the third one. The fourth one would be hand on heart and then hand right at solar plexus. So I'll stand up a little. And so your solar plexus is right at the apex of your rib cage, right? So this would be the fourth one. And then the fifth one I do is just holding both sides of my ribs. So underneath my left hand is my stomach. And when our stomach is settled, it helps to regulate the rest of our system, because it's part of the regulatory process in our body, or regulatory organ. And then your liver is on the other side. And from what I have heard in Chinese medicine, and I'm not trained in it, but liver can hold a lot of anger, heat, and rage. And so when you apply that conduit of compassion, that's your hands, to both of those places, you're also helping your guts to settle, right? Because when we're under a lot of duress, we tend to, most of the organs in our body they tighten up, right? Fascia runs throughout our entire system. And so when we're providing that conduit of compassion to those two areas in our body, the stomach and the liver, then the system has more of an opportunity to downregulate. So that self-holding is a really nice activity to do. The other thing that I do, and I've taught my husband to do this, and I'll just give you the inside scoop right now, because this is part of my training in co-regulating touch. But if you have a safe enough person in your life that you feel okay being touched by or held by, you can have them hold you in a place that might need some care, right? So sometimes I'll have my husband just put his hand right underneath my neck, and I'll tell him, I say, when you touch me, this is the intention. The intention is all is well. I'm a solid and secure base, and I'm a safe haven. So he's thinking these things, and because his hand is the conduit of compassion, his hand is signaling that into my whole system. And it's a remarkable shift to have someone touch you with intentions like that, versus someone that might, and this isn't bad, but someone that just might be sort of like patting you on the back going there, right? Without that intention, the body might experience that pressure and that padding, but then the whole system becomes different when you're actually speaking to the system in this way, indicating yourself as a safe enough person, or that all is well. So I'll stop there and see how that lands. Molly, anything you want to add?
That was beautiful. And I think because there's that curiosity around practices, it could be good to mention just a couple more, and then segue into kind of fusing CYBAM along with co-regulating touch, because I think we're already there.
Yeah.
But accessibility to healing is everything. We are in a time collectively where there are so many barriers. This is something that the Breathe Network, we're focused specifically on sexual trauma, but we recognize the barriers. One of the most important barriers to accessing healing after sexual trauma is financial. So what I appreciate about some of these practices, and what I appreciate about the idea that our body not only knows something about trauma, but it knows something about healing, is that the healing tools and resources are truly right here. and that we can meet our own bodies with our own contact or with other practices in ways that are really helpful. Myra was talking about the contact of the hands on the face, and I have a practice now. I either do it on Fridays or Sundays, but I do like a really long face wash. I take like 10 or 15 minutes, and I have this like special set of oils and washes, and I stretch them out. I use just a tiny bit, but it's like my one time a week where I basically give my face a massage, and I'm cleaning it, and there's no phones, there's no other humans, there might be music, or there might just be quiet, and I'm literally just massaging the muscles of my face, and I'm going slowly, and I'm following where I need to follow. And for me, I've gained comfort in touching my face in that way, and for me that's a resource. And so I want to acknowledge that we're new to making contact with our face, we're new to meeting like our own jaw. Even this can create a wave of activation. So anytime I share a resource, I recognize that what soothes me may not soothe somebody else. But as I massage, I kind of picture that all of everything that had to get kind of quelled or held or set aside in service of my work, or my parenting, or my schedule, or whatever it might be that week, every emotion that I didn't get to fully feel through, every expression that I had to move through too fast, that I'm just letting all of that start to go. And it's a small practice, but it's like I so look forward to it, and it's weekly, and it's like just this way of recognizing that like these tissues are holding some of those stories, and I'm going to meet them. And so you might have your own variation of that, like some kind of body care that has to do with just massaging that boundness or the bracing elements, so that we're all kind of picking up consciously and unconsciously throughout our days, letting some of that go. One of the things, when Myra was showing us the different kinds of contact with the front of the head and the brain stem and the heart and the solar plexus and the belly, what I saw, I was thinking about islands of safety. And I think we mentioned this last week, where as survivors, we can feel like these disparate parts, and we can feel the sense of not being fully connected or coherent. And sometimes when I'm doing different kinds of touch work, and I have two hands that I'm doing it with on myself, sometimes I'm thinking about the communication between the part that one hand is touching and the part that the other hand is touching, and what that might even be like, and how I'm starting to kind of give my body the experience of being in communication with itself. Islands of safety is often this kind of this element we work with within the somatic experiencing practice of, maybe my whole body feels like it's unsafe to inhabit, but for some reason, like my hair is a place where I just feel is soft, and when I touch it, it soothes me. And so maybe this is this place where I go to that has something to do with my body, that is a resource. And I relate from this element of my resource to maybe other places that are feeling less safe. And I see if the experience of making contact with my own hair and feeling that softness, I see what happens next within my body. And maybe what I notice as I'm doing that is, oh, now I kind of feel like my sit bones a little bit more rooted. And now I notice I'm kind of swaying. And swaying for me is a nice self-soothing pattern. And so I think of these islands of safety and the ways we can meet different parts of our body that either are places of comfort, or places that we're seeking to build relationship with, and they can talk to each other. And like sometimes this is like using our imagination. This is like deconditioning or letting go of like what mainstream culture may have told us about our body's capacity, and like really tuning in. and also being playful, like Myra said earlier, with like the messages or the ideas or the images that come through. I want to share one more idea for something that may be accessible. Two more. One is just the idea in SC that rhythm and rhythmic movement can help to counterbalance states of freeze or just places of stuckness. So where do you find rhythm in your day? Is it something intentional like taking a walk? Is it just tracking the rhythm of your own breath and watching that rhythm move? Is it just following a couple cycles of moving your arms up and down and just playing with your own rhythm, noticing the pace of your own body, and using that as a way to land yourself a little bit more in the here and now when things may feel like too much is happening? It's a way of slowing it down, and it's a way of creating self-regulation, with an intentional practice. A lot of self-regulation, I think, starts to happen in time spontaneously. And then we also need these intentional places within our day or our week or different seasons of our life where we have some practices we can lean on. The last thing I want to mention is this exercise we do in somatic experiencing called VUing, which has to do with stimulating the vagus nerve, which the vagus nerve is, we could spend many, many hours talking just about the vagus nerve, but it's the primary element of our parasympathetic nervous system and has to do with sort of mediating our kind of activating energy and then supporting our capacity for resting. And we are kind of working with this nerve and engaging it in different ways throughout our days. However, we know that singing and humming and vocalizing can help to kind of support the part of the vagus nerve that has to do with kind of slowing things down, landing us in our bodies in a more maybe clear way. And so it might be helpful before we pivot to Cybam and co-regulatory touch to even play with VU. I don't know, Myra, do you use VU in your practice?
I use some kind of sounding. It can be VU, it can be Om, it can be singing, it can be any of that stuff. So I don't use VU specifically. I introduce it and then I invite clients to find the sound that they want to make that might feel better. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So for your own, just the purposes of having like another tool in your toolbox, I'm going to demonstrate the VU kind of sound and practice. And you might just think of this as something that you explore later. You might notice, oh, I feel really good when I like turn on music and I sing along with it. Or I notice that it's helpful for me to kind of hum in the morning as I'm getting ready for my day. That's having the same effect on sending the signal to the vagus nerve, which is helping to communicate this bidirectional communication between your brainstem and your guts, that there is capacity and now is a place of settling and coming into greater ease. So the VU sound is a particular sound that Peter Levine, who created somatic experiencing, decided to use, having studied particularly Tibetan chanting traditions and having developed a chanting practice and having used that as part of his own sort of self-regulating and contemplative practice. The story of where VU emerges is that Peter was in the Bay Area and there was heard the sound of like a foghorn and heard the sound of the foghorn as he was noticing this deep, low, sort of resonant sound that was kind of guiding ships more safely through Bay Area fog towards shore. And when you're working with a particular practice or belief or something's just catching you're interested in something, and in his case, trauma and healing, you start to see things through those lenses. He thought of, this is sort of like, this is sort of what trauma healing is. It's like this co-regulation, this therapeutic space where there is this gently guiding somebody through the fog of something to come fully home to the shore of their own being, really. So I use the VU sound in my practice. I use VU kind of before I'm public speaking. I used VU when I was trying to help my child settle for sleep. I used VU when I was in pretty intense traffic and feeling like the feelings of being stuck in my car and not having control. So I'm going to show it to you, and then you can play with it. You could think about joining me for it, or you can just listen. And sometimes just the listening can create an impact. If you feel like you want to pull attention back for that kind of an experience, sometimes we are more sensitive to sound. And I honor that sound is its own kind of boundary. There's a movement from sound into our body. So you might even just, take up one of those self-holding techniques to just give your body that sense of its own boundary while I do the VU sound, if that's helpful to you. The way I'll do it is I'll take a deep inhalation, and then I'll make the VU sound on the exhale. And I'm just going to see the exhale all the way through. And then I'll wait for the next inhale as it arises. And I'll take my VU on the exhale. And I'm just letting the breath come through me. I'm imagining the sound emerging from deep in my belly. And for me, it's helpful to actually place my hands on my belly when I do it. So I'll do it 3 times. If you want to join me, you're welcome. If you want to play with just what it's like for you to try humming and you want to mute me, do what feels right to you. But this may be a tool to come back to later. I like to take just a few natural breaths before I go into the sound as well. Ooh. 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 And when I'm working with someone, we'd spend some time just kind of noticing what we notice. And I'm noticing my own experience. Sometimes clients want to VU together. That's usually what we do. And that's just one variation on how you could use the sound of your own voice as a tool for self-regulation. It's just that sort of resonant kind of anchoring that comes from the inside out that can be enough to send a signal to our parasympathetic nervous system that in this moment there's a little bit more capacity, a little bit more ease, and those tiny little windows, however we get them and whenever we get them, they accumulate. So I'll pause there and I'll see if Myra wants to add anything before we move into Cybam and co-regulatory touch.
I think the only thing that I would add in terms of a regulation practice that I do, especially when I'm overwhelmed, is I create a nest for myself. So in those moments when I'm just really overwhelmed by something, I'll be on my couch or I'll be on my bed, and I've got pillows all around my body so that there's a little bit of pressure and a sense of connection. And I have this particular stuffed animal that I lay on my head. And then I'm just resting quietly and softly in that space that, I call it a nest, but it just feels like a really safe kind of womb. Like it's just me, it's just my breathing. And I'm sending my attention basically out into my body to notice the comfort of all of the pillows and the blanket and the stuffed animal on my head. It's a really, it's a really nice, simple one to do. Because part of the question that we're answering is what happens if you can't go in to see a practitioner. And those are really nice. That building a nest for yourself, I think, is often really pleasant when you need it. And even if you don't need it, I find it still quite pleasant. So I'll just add that piece, and then we can certainly dive into Saibyam and co-regulating touch.
Thank you for that, Myra. And thank you for, we spend most of our time not in those therapeutic spaces, so
Right.
that is what's so important about this practice and about really reframing that our body holds these resources because we're with our bodies all the time. So being able to turn towards them is such a gift. And of course, the work with our practitioners and healers kind of helps us kind of hold that until we can maybe more fully hold it for ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that I want to be very kind of efficient around Saibyam because co-regulatory touch is really where I want to spend these final 25 minutes or so. The reason I want to name Saibyam is because I think in the somatics conversation, somatics has come to be correlated with just with sensation. And I think that can feel like a barrier for a lot of us who really struggle with sensation, rightly so, particularly as survivors of interpersonal violence, where feeling the sensation or tuning into it is just going to be too much. So sensation is the first part of that Saibyam channel of experience that we are observing and holding and really honoring within the somatic experiencing practice. So when we're working with clients, when we're tracking ourselves, sensation is, of course, how we maybe most directly relate to our body. And there's a recognition when we're attending to sensation that it is also going to require some degree of a boundary negotiation and conversation. Like, does the body consent to paying attention to sensation? It doesn't always consent to that. And I've done SE. I have a client I've been supporting with SE for a number of years. And it was maybe at least 2 years before we were really beginning to wade into sensation tracking. It was popping up in moments, but really the conditions weren't right yet for this client to begin to really feel sensation in their own body as it related to sexual trauma. So we worked through the other channels, recognizing that some of us have readily access to sensation, and we want to maybe cultivate these other channels of experience. And there's no better way or more right way of inhabiting our bodies. There's just these different pathways. Imagery or imagination is one of the pathways. It's the I in Saibyam. And imagery is really powerful, I think, because we can get distance from the experience, from the event, from the person, even from the pain of the memory, by using the imagery channel. So we might say something like, if your body could have done anything in the world at that moment, what do you think it might have wanted to do? And we are not worried about what the human body is capable of. We're not worried about the realities of like time and space and gravity. We are making it possible for anything to have had happened. And then we might work the experience through that channel. I said earlier, I made mention of like putting something on the other side of the room. It could be a memory, a sensation, the idea of a person. We could put them across the ocean. We can get really specific about that. And then we can track, what's that like when that person is now standing on the South Pole, and here you are like in Norway, very far away from them. What do you notice in your experience? when we create that distance. And so imagery can be a way of giving ourselves enough space to look at the event in a way that doesn't totally overwhelm us. Behaviors are the only thing that we as the practitioner can really track from the outside. So we're noticing, we're hearing language, we're noticing gestures, we're noticing, as Myra was pointing out, like movements, a client that might continue to do this. We're noticing what might be some self-soothing patterns. We're noticing incomplete self-protective responses. We might see somebody do this with their hands or pull themselves back. And those are things we're going to start to be curious about with the folks that we're working with. And we're also going to take our time bringing attention to them, because it can also be kind of jarring or vulnerable to have somebody noticing something about our body that we haven't yet noticed ourselves. The A is affect or emotion. So we're giving people space to slowly feel some of the emotions around their experiences, to feel those fully through. Sometimes we need to complete an emotion before we can maybe even complete like a motor response that the body wanted to do. Sometimes the emotion, there can be fear and trepidation around leading into an emotion because it feels like it's so big, it might overwhelm us. And that's where that titration piece is so important. Even just holding the question, what would it be like if you just imagined letting some of that grief start to move through? What would it be like if we could just hold the grief right here in our hands and just start to see it there? So we're really giving space to any of these experiences. And then the meaning, like meaning making is important. Giving language to our experience is really important. Being able to use our voice and to contextualize our experiences of trauma within the larger biography of our lives is important. Saying it aloud is important. Using language is really powerful, and often we're reflecting language back. Like when I hear somebody say, I survived, I am going to mirror that language back. And then we might just be with like what it's like to hear yourself say something like that. So that's like a quick overview of all the things we're tracking. And I think it's important because these are the things we can be paying attention to throughout our day, or, over different cycles and seasons of our lives, and giving some really gentle attention to not just sensation, not just like, how does my body feel right now, but maybe where is there an emotion that wants to arise, or how can I meet my body with touch, or what's an image right now that would be really resourcing to me in this space. So Myra, do you want to add here? Or Farzana, it looks like you want to say something.
I wonder, before we segue to co-regulating, Myra and Molly, we've had a few questions around, what happens when you just can't feel. And obviously that might be speaking to freeze and being disassociative. So if there's just a little bit of expansion that you both could do, because it's come up a few times of just not being able to feel.
I'll put it in the context of CYBAM. So I use those acronyms a little bit differently, and I'll share that in the context of this question. So CYBAM, I think of the S for somatics in general, and not just sensations, because especially with my experience in working with clients who have experienced sexual trauma, feeling anything in their body is the last thing that they want to do. And so with that great question of what happens if you can't feel, I might sort of switch that a little bit to responding and saying something like, what if it was okay if you didn't feel? And how is it to hear that coming from me? So I'm not pinging the sensations in particular. I'm more just bringing us into the present moment to notice what it would be like if they didn't have to do anything different. And if where they were at in the non-feeling place, or the maybe lack of ability to feel sensation, if that could be okay. And then part of what I mean when I brought in the S from sensation to somatics is part of what somatics is just anything that refers to the body. So when I was working with eating disorders, I would have clients just notice how it felt to swallow, like that. Just as, you know, and I would try to find the least overwhelming thing that they could do. It might be just something like, let's just squeeze your hand really hard and just notice what that feels like, right? So that what we're wanting to do is titrate slowly and supporting that client to come into their body slowly in the easiest door that can open. And sensation is not an easy one. So it might even just be movement, right? So I think of movement as part of somatics. Like, what happens when you wave your arm in the air? And can you just tell me if you like it or don't like it? Right? And if they can't tell you, then that's okay too. And then we go on to the next experiment or the next plaything. So I just wanted to add that piece. And then the other thing I just want to add in general about SciBAM is that the goal of SciBAM is to help our clients broaden the experience of being themselves. What trauma does is it narrows our experience of being ourselves and living in life. And most of my clients are often too good, so to speak, at meaning making. They might feel something in their body and then think to themselves almost immediately something's wrong. And so when you're working with SciBAM as whether you're a clinician or a survivor, the idea is to play around with what else could, for example, okay, I'm having this sensation. I wonder what else this could mean. I had a client once when we were working together. She came back after one of our touch sessions and she told me that something was really wrong in her gut and her stomach. And we just sort of talked about it. And one of the things I realized, I said, I think what you might be experiencing is not that anything is wrong, but that your food is digesting. And it was like this aha moment that the gurgling and the movement in her guts that were now starting to come online, there was nothing wrong with it. So we had to apply a different sense of meaning. So in SciBAM, you're trying to access as many of those channels of the body, somatics, imagery, behavior. With behavior, the other thing I'll add too is I always think of behavior. I also look at bracing. So brace patterns is something that I'm paying attention to all the time. I'm saying something and then the client kind of goes, it's, you know, it might be, I'll be a little bit dramatic, but they'll kind of go like this. And it's like, ooh, that didn't land so well, did it? What happened? Because we don't know that we're sucking in our gut all the time or tensing our thighs or clenching our jaw until we start to feel safer in the context of being in our body. So does that make sense what I'm saying, Molly, in terms of like, we want to access as many of those channels as possible versus
Yeah.
just the one or two that we're typically really good at, right? Because we
Yeah.
or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I would love, that was beautiful. And I'd love if you could take us into to co-regulatory touch. Like we're getting at it. And I know we have, 10 minutes or so, but um, let's lead into that. Cause I think, it's still hard to understand, like, how's it different than body work, like massage body work as we know it, and like, why is it so important, and why can it be so powerful for sexual trauma survivors and developmental trauma?
Yeah. So co-regulating touch was created by Kathy Cade and Stephen Terrell, and they're both somatic experiencing practitioners. And in the most basic way, co-regulating touch is really designed for early trauma. What somatic experiencing is really good at is working with shock trauma states. So single event threatening events that rocked the nervous system and brought it out of its ability to be regulated. When you have early trauma or developmental trauma is defined as any trauma that occurs either in an ongoing way or in a single episode way from the ages of 0 to 10. And when I work a lot with clients who grew up in homes that were really not safe, so there was abuse and neglect, and then of course other kinds of trauma. And co-regulating touch is meant to replace that lack of care and attunement or lack of safety that occurred in those early years. And one of the ways that I talk about it with clients is that when they get on my table and we're working, one of the things I say is, I'm doing the work to support your regulation, and I don't need you to do anything. So one of the experiences of being a client of co-regulating touch is that there's no demands being placed on you to be any different. You're lying down on a table. And one of the ways that this is really different than massage or other forms of therapeutic touch is that it's passive. So the typical areas that I hold are the kidneys and the brainstem. Those are the regulatory places. So there's this fancy term called the hypothalamic pituitary axis, or the HPA axis. And your kidneys, which are shaped like a kidney bean, sitting right on top of that is the adrenal system on both sides. And so the idea is that when I'm holding your kidney with intention and I'm attuned to your system as well as to my system, and how our systems are sort of pinging back and forth with each other. And I'll also just sort of preempt this by saying that when I'm doing this work, I am definitely the most regulated person in the room. I don't lay hands on any clients if I didn't get enough sleep, if I'm feeling off in any way, if I'm feeling, I don't know, I've got a headache. That's just not going to work, because nervous systems unconsciously are working together to be in the same space. And Molly spoke earlier about lending regulation to the people around you. So co-regulating touch is in my world, is a very intimate and sacred experience that's happening where the whole world is just really me and this client. And we hold their kidneys because of that adrenal system. We know that the adrenals pump out cortisol and adrenaline, and that creates those high sympathetic arousal states. We also hold the brainstem. So, they're laying face up on a table, and I'm basically holding their head, because the brainstem is one of the earliest structures that brings about regulation. And it's also connected to the vagus nerve, which seats right back there. So the other thing to know about co-regulating touch is that, in reference to somatic experiencing is predicated on the fact that in those early years, your system was able to have an experience of regulation, where you would come into an arousal state and then it would settle. And then you would come into an arousal state and then it would settle. If there's been early trauma, that pattern is not there. And so what co-regulating touch is designed to do is reintroduce that pattern, help the nervous system come back into that pattern, because our bodies are incredibly wise. So bodies actually really know how to do this, even if they didn't have it in those early years. So when clients are lying on my table, they're doing no work except for receiving. And they get this experience. I remember one in particular where a client sat up and she was kind of spacey. It was her first or second session. And she started crying and she's like, "What's happening to me?" And she was kind of distressed. I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I don't understand what's going on." And I made some observations that I saw that her body felt softer and that her breathing was full and that her face looked soft. And I said, "I wonder if part of what you might be feeling is a deep sense of relaxation that you didn't actually have to work for." And she just started sobbing, and it was like recognition, like, "Oh, so my body can feel like that?" It's like, yes, it can feel like that. So I want to just stop here, but that's the quick overview of what co-regulating touch is. And the last thing I want to say is, so in somatic experiencing, we're looking for completions. We're looking for the completion of that thwarted fight-flight energy. And in co-regulating touch, there isn't that completion, because we're working with really, really young states. So a lot of the work is at this very unconscious level. And there's not a lot of talking. I encourage my clients not necessarily to talk a lot if possible, because we're working in that deep way of the nervous system and basically helping to rebuild a structure that the neuroceptive structure that helps us to more easily find regulation without having to do all of the work to get there. Is everybody breathing? I'm going to breathe right now.
That was really beautiful, Myra. I just appreciate the way you remind us that, like, we have that capacity. And I think that it's uniquely important that there is this way of supporting the nervous system that doesn't require effort. So much of healing can feel like this uphill effort.
Yes.
And like, what you do and the way you hold space for people is like that the healing comes through places of rest and ease, and that you are there to support that in actually happening. And I think that's such a gift to have those kinds of healing spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
I wonder if it might be quite beautiful to move into, because I think some of the questions need a lot of space. And so maybe we could do maybe a self hold together, or even some kind of grounding or orienting that might just support us to also resume for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that
Myra,
sounds good.
Myra, would you like to lead that?
Yeah, sure. That would be great. So just know, everyone that's listening, that everything that I'm going to invite you to do is an invitation, and it's never going to be me telling you what to do. So whatever feels comfortable to you, maybe find a more comfortable position where you are. It can be lying down, it could be seated up. And by comfort, I mean, let your body rest, lean back in the chair, lie down on the ground, let your arms rest at your sides. And I'm going to invite you, I've been playing around with this acronym called FLOW, and I want you to get into the flow state with me. And the acronym stands for feeling love over worry. So getting into a flow state is helping you get into a state of feeling love over worry. So the first thing that I invite you to do is to think about something that you love and or that loves you back. It might be a person or a pet. It might be a particular place in the world that you are just really drawn to and often feels good for you. And using the imaginal of the Saibam, the eye of Saibam, bring that image to mind of that person, pet, place, or thing. And as you notice that image in your mind, send a little attention right to the left of your left of center, towards the back, into your heart space. And the invitation is to connect that sense of imagery directly to your heart. And part of what I invite you to notice is if you have a feeling of love in your body. And if it helps, you can also put your hand directly on your heart and rest it there. And remember that when we place hands on ourselves, our hands are the conduits of compassion. So that is the just right touch at the left side of your chest in the front. And then notice what happens if you shift your attention from that image you had before of that person or place or object, and come into your heart space directly and notice if there's any images that arise in your heart. It might be a color, it might be a gem. And one of the things I like to do for myself is I will imagine my heart opening. Love is a generative experience, meaning it generates more love, more care, more kindness, more compassion. And if you were to let your heart open, invite your heart to open as much or as little as it wants, notice what might be happening in your system that is on the order of goodness or ease. Maybe there's a softening somewhere, or you're getting tearful. And then see if you can send that feeling of love wider into your system, as if that experience could expand from your heart further into the rest of your chest, towards the back, towards the sides. And this is just a gentle, slow experience of inviting that love to flow through your entire system and not just at your heart space. And you can bring that energy all the way down to your feet if you like, also all the way to the top of your head. And then before you come back into present time with all of us here on the call, see if you can notice what might feel different about being you. Is your mind less cluttered? Is your breathing softer and fuller? Can you feel a different part of your body that you haven't felt before? And is it okay? Then at your leisure, you can bring your attention back into the room. I use this a lot, getting into a flow state, feeling love over worry. And that's the process that I use.
Thank you so much, Myra, for bringing us into flow and also introducing me to flow. I just want to take a moment to really appreciate and send love to Myra and Molly. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you.